Friends, neighbors, and fellow Romans, welcome to the Flipped Lecture to top all flipped lectures. The lecture that will prepare you for your final exam essay and leave you weeping with the joy of increased knowledge and wisdom. After this, you may go back to watching your wrong direction videos with that Larry Lyles fellow. He's so adorable. But I digress. Was the Catholic Church, the one church of the Dark and Middle Ages, a force for good, or not so good in the Dark and Middle Ages? Listen on, webheads, for illumination awaits with nasty, big, pointy teeth. First, let's commence with the undeniable good that the Church did. Bah, good. Let's talk about the heroic actions of the Church during this time of anarchy and confusion. Truly, the Church seemed to follow the commandment of Jesus to, quote, love your enemies and to bless them that curse you, unquote. First, the Catholic Church converted the German tribes who had taken down the Empire of Rome. The German tribes were not united but were exceptionally warlike. They lacked the know-how needed to maintain or even begin to comprehend Roman administration and infrastructure, so it all collapsed, plunging Europe into the anarchy of the Dark Ages. The tribes warred against each other constantly, partly because of their Norse gods. Odin, Thor, Freya, and Frigg rewarded those who died in battle with Valhalla, a warrior's paradise of feasting and fighting forever. The Church sent missionary after missionary to these tribesmen. Many a monk became a martyr, dying for their faith. But slowly, but surely, the Church converted these German tribes, most notably the Franks and their great King Charlemagne, who will be powerful allies for the Church, and together they will try to rebuild a new Holy Roman Empire. Although it didn't last, the Church deserved great praise for civilizing the German tribes. Oh, but there is so much more. In the 800s, Wave 2 of German tribes invaded and raided all through Europe. These berserkers were the Vikings from scandalous Scandinavia. With their dragon ships, their axes, and their eagerness to die in battle for Valhalla, the Vikings assured that Europe stayed in the Dark Ages, as they raided, pillaged, and burned, and especially burned monasteries and churches for their gold and silver. It was in large part, again, their gods that made the Vikings so destructive. Once more, the Church sent their missionaries, some who again became martyrs, and through time, once more, Christ was victorious. The Vikings were conquered themselves by Christianity, and suddenly taking thralls and ransacking monasteries just wasn't so much fun anymore. With the Viking threat gone, the Church had brought a relative stability to Europe. But again, the Church's good works continues on and on during this time period. While during the Dark Ages much learning was lost, the Church did what they could to save the legacy of Greece and Rome. In their monasteries, monks preserved, rewrote, and protected this ancient knowledge, so it could be made use of once again during the Renaissance. Thanks to the Church, the works of Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and the history of the Caesars can still be retold today. And what about everybody's favorite topic, universal health care coverage? Taking their cue from Jesus, the Church cared for the sick, the poor, the needy. They provided help at a time when there was little help. The Church's charity provided almost the only knowledgeable health care of the time period. As Europe moved deeper into the Middle Ages and into feudalism, the Church continued to tame the warlike lords and famed knights of the day. This was a time when almost no one but the local priests could read and write. Instead, lords and vassals swore oaths to God. These verbal contracts were backed up by the Church and God and the threat of hell. Indeed, when life expectancy rarely extended into the 40s, the Church enforced good moral behavior on all, or else. To further civilize the time, the Church devised the Code of Chivalry. Chivalry dictated rules to warfare. Unarmed enemies were not to be attacked. Attacking from behind was wrong. Women were to be respected, and the weak and innocent were to be protected. Over and over again, the Church worked to bring about peace during this time and ease the suffering of the poor and the peasants, who were 98% of the population. Yay, Jedi Jesus! Yay, Catholic Catholic Church! Go Catholic Church! But as we know, it wasn't all gravy for the Catholic Church during the Dark and Middle Ages. The Church did its best to follow the Ten Commandments and to bring the love of Jesus to all peoples. But they, at times, got a bit carried away. As really the only people able to read the Latin Bible, the Catholic Church believed that they had a monopoly on God's will and on truth. After all, Jesus called St. Peter, the rock upon which I will build my church, and the Pope sat over top of Peter's bones in Rome. And so, the Pope spoke for God. At least that's what the Pope said. This gave the Pope and the Church enormous power. And power, as we know, corrupts. And so in the Church's eagerness to assure that everyone believed correctly and did not believe in heresy or false teachings, the Church operated the Inquisition. These were church courts to find heretics and witches, but the rules of this court were all twisted. In the Inquisition, you were always guilty. Guilty, 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 guilty. Since you were guilty, you had to confess, so that God may forgive you. Most confessed quickly. However, if the person refused to confess, they would be threatened with torture. And if that didn't work, well, then they would just be tortured. Tortured, 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 and tortured some more, until they confessed. The Church got really creative with their torture. Be it by the rack, the inquisitional chair, the cat's claw, pressing, waterboarding, or the garroting chair. Be certain everyone confessed. It was just a matter of time before they extracted a confession from you, and you admitted anything they wanted you to. Now this is disturbing enough, but the Inquisition's practices, if possible, got even worse. You see, if you recanted, or by meaning took back your original confession, or if the Church just felt you were too dangerous, they burned you alive. They would even wet down the wood and fan the smoke away, so that way the pain and the burning would last longer. Now certainly, the burning of a witch or a heretic was probably a rare event, but try telling that to the many people that were sentenced to death this way by the Catholic Church. Don't worry, this is just a rare event. The Church's belief that they knew God's will led them to other extremes. In response to events in Turkey and the Middle East, Pope Urban II declared war on Islam. In a remarkable speech at Clermont, France, he declared that Jesus Christ would lead the armies of Christendom thousands of miles away to conquer the city of Jerusalem. The war would be known as a crusade, and nowhere in the Bible can this word be found. But no matter. Peasants, led by Peter the Hermit, great lords and great kings such as Richard the Lion-Hearted, all made the journey to the Holy Land, to kill for the Lord and fight for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. The Church even doubled down on these crusades by creating warrior monks such as the Templars and the Hospitallers. Now, while the Crusades are full of great stories, and opened up Europe to the ideas of the Arabs and trade from China, and are also very historically entertaining, were they really the will of God? Really? God wills it? God willed this? Well, that's what the Catholic Church of the Middle Ages would have had you believe. The Church's insistence that their monopoly of truth and knew God's will also led them to burn the savior of France, Joan of Arc, over clothing. And it led them to imprison the great Galileo Galilei, because the Church insisted that the universe had to be geocentric, or earth-centered. After all, man, and especially Mr. Herman, is God's greatest creation. But the Church will not be able to enforce this monopoly during the time of new thinking, new ideas, and the humanism of the Renaissance. The Church had overreached again and again, and when their desires for money, to sell indulgencies to build St. Peter's Basilica, pictured here, offended the senses of the German monk Martin Luther, the Church will lose their monopoly on truth. They will not abandon this monopoly without a fight, as Europe will be engulfed in religious wars, and Catholics will kill Protestants, and Protestants will kill Catholics. But in the end, the unity of the Catholic Church and of Christianity is broken, probably forever. The Church's extremes, their greed, and their bad behavior, their hypocrisy, led to their loss of power and led to immense suffering by many during the Dark and Middle Ages. Their power corrupted them. But remember, it is undeniable that the Church did much good during this time also. Let's recap! First of all, the good that the Church did. They converted the German tribes and the Vikings, whose belief in Valhalla made them terribly warlike. Thank you, Catholic Church. They preserved the knowledge of Greece and Rome. Where would we be without Socrates? Thank you, Catholic Church. Education and medicine. They were the ones to provide healing during the time of anarchy. Thank you, Catholic Church. The code of chivalry. Where would the ladies be without young men holding open doors and car doors and hopefully not slamming the ladies in the car? Okay. Thank you, Catholic Church. And their never-ending constant attempts to bring about peace in Europe. They made a very, very difficult time period softer, gentler, and better for the people of Europe. Yes, but there is the not-so-good, of course. The Church had the Inquisition to enforce truth and make sure no one believed in heresy, and they were even willing to go to the extent of torture to assure that people believed correctly. They launched religious wars known as the Crusades, and the Crusades went on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Wars against Islam to free the city of Jerusalem. Poor Galileo and Joan of Arc. Why can't we just dress however we want to dress? And, of course, the hypocrisy of the Church during the time of Martin Luther. The Church did much good during this time. But they did do some things that were, of course, not so good. So, on the scales of good and not so good, where's the Church way out? Did they do more good, or did they do more not so good? That is a question that you must decide for yourself. Stay true, true believers. Stay classy, San Diego.